the more power and wealth you have, the cooler you are, and people are beneath you is also a long-standing generational curse of humans.
That totally doesn't have any negative repercussions at all moving forward. On that bright note, let's just hope our civilization doesn't fall beneath the waves.
Let's not be Atlantis, please. Welcome, everybody, to Unraveling the Unexplained. My name is Kat, and I'm a longtime astral traveler and spirit consultant. This is my brother John, longtime fan of the creepy and the paranormal.
Hello, folks.
He has picked out a video for me to react to. I don't know what it is, but we are about to find out together.
Lost continents and ancient civilizations are among the most fascinating and intriguing mysteries in human history. Among countless legends, one holds a unique significance across multiple cultures and beliefs. The ancient continent of Mu, often referred to as the Garden of Eden, where humanity first emerged. This mysterious continent has captivated scientists, adventurers, and history enthusiasts for centuries, with many dedicating their lives to uncovering its secrets. But was Mu real, or just a product of myths and legends? Many of you might have heard of Mu somewhere, but how did this legend come to be?
I've literally never heard of Mu.
I've heard of Mu, just not in relation to a continent.
Our journey begins with James Churchward, a British researcher and soldier born in 1851. He became deeply intrigued by the mysterious and exotic past of India, learning Sanskrit and studying ancient epics on his own. One day while in Tibet, Churchward met a Hindu mystic who later became his mentor. Through their conversations, Churchward learned about a people once called the Nechal, but the information was far from ordinary and held extraordinary insights into human history. Churchward dedicated himself to learning these secrets and eventually became a member of a group tasked with guarding this hidden knowledge. After years of study, the mystic initiated Churchward into the secrets of the Nechal language. According to his book, this ancient people once lived on a large continent in the Pacific Ocean called Mu, a civilization with advanced technology, culture, and belief system. Legends suggest that this civilization, believed to have existed around 70,000 years ago, flourished for thousands of years, establishing advanced colonies worldwide, such as Egypt, Toltec, and Sumer. Churchward continued to provide information about the continent, claiming that Mu's religion was monotheistic, centered around the harmony of nature and energy. Ultimately, Churchward claimed that the continent, home to 64 million people, sank into the sea around 12,000 years ago due to massive cataclysms, an event believed to have inspired the worldwide flood myth. According to Churchward, after this catastrophe and the subsequent destruction of Mu, the offspring civilizations of Mu, like the Toltecs and Egyptians, lost their connection to the center, leading them to develop and evolve their own beliefs. However, their core beliefs remained similar or the same. Churchward was not the first to claim that humanity descended from a common ancestor civilization. The famous mystic and founder of Theosophy, Helena Blavatsky, provided similar information. According to Blavatsky, the first root race was composed of beings with ethereal bodies. The humanity we know today evolved over time from these energy bodies, constituting the fifth race. Likewise, Augustus Le Plongeon, during his research in South America, presented evidence that the Maya civilization was founded by the Nechal people who migrated there before the collapse of Mu. He also wrote about the symbolic similarities between the Maya and Egyptian cultures. He translated this interesting information from the Troano Codex, an ancient Maya manuscript now known as the Madrid Codex. Now, let's summarize these claims. There is the concept of a root race that lived 100,000 to 50,000 years ago. These people were the founders of an advanced civilization with highly developed technology, linked to the continent of Mu and the Atlantis civilization. According to the claims, the continent of Mu sank into the Pacific Ocean around 12,000 BC due to cataclysmic events. But to support such a significant claim, we need to find substantial connections. Some of you might think that these ideas are far-fetched or fantastical, but there's a situation where we've recently started finding highly intriguing evidence to support these claims.
Okay, so I'm just going to pause really fast to say, I don't know that it's far-fetched and fantastical. I think that, you know, we piece together our history over the pieces of it that we find in order to look at and research.
I mean, in order to know that something existed, you need evidence that usually stems from either old writings or things found archaeologically, you know, pieces of that civilization, architecture, pottery, weapons, skeletons. But
I think there is a mistake in thinking that the pieces that we've pieced together so far represent the entire picture. It would be like finding pieces here and there and trying to piece together a puzzle, but assuming that you know what the entire picture is before you have all of the pieces of it.
Like, you might be able to kind of extrapolate an idea of what the picture might look like, but that's, you're kind of doing guesswork.
Right. So I think that there's a shift in thought process that would be helpful of like, rather than going, there's no proof of that, there, you know what I mean? Accepting that we don't have the entire puzzle put together yet.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe there isn't any proof of it yet. Maybe they're still looking for stuff. I'm sure we'll hear about some of it here in a second. But to assume that you have the entire picture based off of just the pieces you've already found excludes the possibility that there are more pieces out there or that we won't continue finding.
That it isn't worth it to continue looking around and searching for information and...
Right. And that's been sort of the viewpoint since, you know, everything we've ever found. And how many times have we proven ourselves wrong when we find a new piece of information and a new piece of information, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not saying believe things blindly if there's no proof, but what I am saying is I think we would do well to have an opener mind about it. Because we've proved to ourselves over and over again that we find more pieces of evidence and more pieces of the puzzles and new, you know.
Yeah.
Science is the art of questioning, right? But I think it's become a lot more stringent. Like
not as much questioning.
Well, I mean, nobody ever discovered anything new by just accepting things the way they are. It takes imagination. It takes looking at the evidence. It takes exploration of things unknown.
It takes a willingness to get out there and look at potentially new evidence.
Right. Every major scientific discovery is made by somebody who went out looking for the more. You know what I mean? And so I think it's a healthier mindset to keep an open mind and understand that science is an evolving process.
Yeah, and it's never going to stop evolving. You're never going to stop learning new things.
Exactly. Our picture of who we are, where we came from, and how reality works is shaped by and shook by every new discovery that we make.
Yeah.
So I think it's well to have an opener mind about what that picture might look like when we find more pieces of it, basically.
Talking about a civilization that reached a global level, how would we trace its influence? The answer is simple, by finding common symbols, beliefs, and engineering similarities. These researchers tell us that the people of Mu possessed highly advanced engineering, particularly in stonework, mastering its secrets. When we examine thousands of years of civilizations, we find that stonework was often more advanced than it is today. For example, when studying ancient cities like Machu Picchu and Ollantaytambo in Peru, we noticed that the stones seemed to be seamlessly interlocked, almost as if they were fused together, despite being massive in size. But it's not just these. In Pumapunku, these stones were carved from andesite, which has a Mohs hardness of 7. To put this into perspective, one of the hardest materials we know of, diamond, has a Mohs hardness of 10. To carve stones at Pumapunku, you'd need either diamond-tipped tools, advanced machinery, or industrial lasers, yet we still haven't solved the mystery of how such perfect stonework was achieved. Another example of such advanced stone architecture is the Baalbek Temple in Lebanon. This temple is one of the oldest and most mysterious in the world. We don't know who originally built it, but later civilizations constructed their own temples atop its foundation stones. Here is one of the foundational stones of Baalbek, one of the largest monolithic construction blocks in the world. These stones, known as the trilithon, are each 19 meters long, 4.5 meters wide, and 3.5 meters high, with an estimated weight of 800 to 1,000 tons. Mainstream history tells us that these stones were placed by the Romans on an older temple. But there are two problems here. First, 800 tons is more than the combined weight of 7 Boeing 747 planes, and as far as we know, the Roman civilization didn't possess the technology to move such massive blocks. Even today, the world's most powerful crane can lift only 1,200 tons. Remember, the Romans expanded Baalbek. It was built on top of a temple constructed by the Phoenicians. who themselves built atop an even older structure. In other words, we don't know who, when, or why Baalbek was originally built, but current knowledge suggests it dates back to around 9000 BC. Especially with the recent discoveries and expanded research on the Nan Madol.
It makes me think of that other video that we did about the
guy who moved around the stones and created kind of his little theme park area.
The Coral Castle.
Yeah.
In Florida, where the one dude built all of this massive stuff with all of these giant stones, and nobody really knows how he did it.
Yeah. I was thinking the same thing, where we've got a situation here where apparently an entire sets of different civilizations have had a means of working with stone that is hard for us to replicate even with modern technology, and nobody really seems to be sure how it was done or even who did it.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any record of these structures from that long ago, or why they were built, or how that was done. So, you know, that is a tangible evidence that something was going on that we don't really understand. Right?
Yeah, some ancient civilization maybe knew certain things we didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, believe me, I'm a fan. I watch the Ancient Aliens.
Yeah.
You know, I like all kinds of stuff like this. So yeah. And you know, I don't necessarily think that it's evidence of alien intervention or, you know, extraterrestrial influence on Earth or anything. Like, I don't know that there's anything to really suggest that, but it seems clear that there's things about our past that we don't know about, right? The puzzle picture is not complete. So
all structures, this theory has been reignited once again. Nan Madol, an ancient city built on an artificial island in Micronesia covering an area of 18 square kilometers, is believed by some to mark the southern boundary of the Mu continent. However, if you mention this idea, mainstream history might ridicule you. When I say mainstream science, you know what I'm talking about. I discussed it in last week's video. Let's first delve into Nan Madol before making any judgments. This city is a completely man-made structure, built using monolithic stones that range in weight from 5 to 50 tons, with the largest being 7 meters long. While it may sound simple, it's anything but. The entire city was built using approximately 1 million tons of basalt rock, and even in its current state, the walls still stand 10 meters high. What makes it even more mysterious is that we don't know how or where these stones were transported from. Now let's examine how mainstream history explains this event. The internet tells us that Nan Madol was built in the year 1200 AD by the Sodelur dynasty, which ruled for 400 years and was established in 1100 AD. This was a primitive island society, yet just a century later, they somehow managed to construct this extraordinary structure and made it their capital. This raises a few questions. First, if this dynasty was primitive, how could they have moved such massive stones? History has no answer for this. Second, how did they build such advanced infrastructure, with features like a sophisticated irrigation system, when there is no similar structure from this dynasty? History again has no answer. Third, how does mainstream history conclude that Nan Madol was built by the Sodelur dynasty, when there are no answers to the first two questions? The answer lies in the archaeological evidence found at Nan Madol, which includes artifacts from that dynasty.
Okay, so I'm just going to stop really fast to put out there, because it may be something that people aren't really aware of, and I'm not saying it's a good thing, but science has a long history of open ridicule. Like, one of their things is the scrutiny of your work, right? In order to prove something's true, it's going to be heavily scrutinized.
Yeah, it has to be peer reviewed.
And they have a long history of bullying and openly criticizing each other. Like, Einstein caught a lot of open ridicule when he came up with his theories.
Yeah. Same
thing with Schrodinger, like feet in the flames. When you're going to put a theory out, it needs to be proved, and it's going to be under hella scrutiny. The man who proposed that the atom exists was bullied so hard about it that he unalived himself.
Yeah.
So science has a long history of bullying and ridiculing and shaming people who come up with new things. And I'm not saying that's a healthy culture. I'm not saying that it's something that, should continue to perpetuate. I think people should be free and open-minded to come up with new ideas. The heavy scrutiny that scientists fall under is a long-standing thing for them. Like, it's if you're coming up with theories like this and they're being ridiculed and scrutinized, that is the culture of the scientific community.
Yeah.
They used to hold public debates where they were literally yelling at each other. Like like that's the history of it.
It's
so
like I can understand why there's a culture of, if you're going to come up with a theory, you better back it up with some proof and evidence. But at the same time, it's clear that maybe it's taken a little too far in the sense of, how do I describe it? Almost cult-like mentality of, this is the established thing. How dare you challenge it? You know?
If you're going to challenge something that's the established thing, you got to bring the receipts. And so that's an understandable point of view for science to have. But yeah, the ridicule and the bullying gets a little out of hand. But just for some context, there's a long history of that within the scientific community. So
maybe everybody could stand to loosen up a little and just, you know.
Yeah, some of the most brilliant minds in science were heavily bullied and scrutinized when they came out with their later proven to be totally accurate theories. So.
Yeah. Like, it's fine to seek and demand evidence, but at the same time, you don't got to be an asshole about it.
Well, and at the same time, like, don't be afraid to come out with a new idea, a theory, or propose something just because you're afraid of being ridiculed. Because a lot of the people who were heavily ridiculed were proven ultimately to be correct. They got bullied, they got ridiculed, and now they have Nobel Prizes. So I'm just saying, like, at the same time, don't be afraid of the scrutiny. Don't be afraid of having ideas. You know what I mean?
But couldn't these people have settled in this unmatched city after its original builders had left, as has happened many times in history with sites like Teotihuacan, Pumapunku and Angkor Wat? The official answer is yes, that's possible. Yet we're still expected to believe that this primitive society built the city. When alternative researchers or channels make similar speculative conclusions, they are dismissed as holding fantastical ideas. But when mainstream history fills in the gaps with their assumptions, we're supposed to accept them as fact. Since 1986, Professor Masaaki Kimura and his team from Ryukyu University have been exploring a structure discovered by accident in the 1980s, now known as the Yonaguni Monument. This structure features sharp edges, circular passageways and recesses, making it incredibly surprising. Studies on Yonaguni are ongoing, so it's difficult to provide definite conclusions like with Nanmadol. However, the precise edges and interior angles we've mentioned raise questions about whether the site is man-made. According to Professor Kimura, if Yonaguni is indeed a man-made site, it would have submerged between 10,000 and 13,000 BC. No one would build such a structure underwater just for the sake of fantasy, and scientifically this coincides with the period when sea levels were rising worldwide, once again aligning with the flood myth. Another clue related to Mu comes from the famous Easter Island. Classical history tells us that the island once hosted 25,000 people, who eventually depleted its resources and abandoned the island, leaving behind the colossal Moai statues as their legacy. There's a small problem, though. Easter Island is isolated in the middle of the Pacific, 3,500 kilometers from the nearest continent and 2,000 kilometers from the closest other island. So how did these people settle there? When we search for answers, history tells us that they were an ancient Polynesian people who sailed to the island in canoes, using their advanced seafaring skills. Now, the Polynesians weren't like the ancient Sumerians. They were more like a tribal society. So, what would motivate these people to leave their homes, venture out in canoes into the vast and dangerous Pacific Ocean, and eventually discover the small Easter Island, a distance twice the length of Turkey? History's official response is that historians filled in the gaps using current evidence. But what if there was once a larger landmass, and these people simply walked to this region, or perhaps they arrived guided by ancient knowledge, knowing at least where they were headed? Such ideas are dismissed, yet the mainstream theory that Polynesians travelled by canoe to the middle of the Pacific is accepted. Don't underestimate those who propose alternative ideas. For years it was claimed that the Polynesians erected the statues for religious purposes, until recent excavations revealed that some of these statues are not just heads, but have massive 20-metre-tall bodies weighing 200 tons. For those wondering why these statues were buried, mainstream history says they buried them themselves. However, some statues were found already buried in the earth when first discovered, indicating they weren't buried for fun, but due to some event. You can probably guess what that event was. Another concept used by people like Churchward to support the idea of a common ancestor civilization, Mu, is symbols and beliefs. According to this idea, there was a monotheistic belief system on Mu, symbolized by the sun. This was a simple and spiritual belief system that didn't branch into complex religions. However, by the end of the continent's existence, the belief system had become corrupt, with a priestly class seizing power. When the continent disappeared, it was seen as divine retribution. Churchward claims that this sun symbol-based monotheistic belief system spread to other advanced colonies of Mu, such as Egypt, and after the continent's collapse, evolved into polytheistic systems filled with symbolic concepts, but the main creator figure always remained at the top. There are many symbolic similarities to support this idea. For instance, Churchward claims that one of the creation symbols in this belief system was a seven-headed serpent representing the seven fundamental principles of creation in Mu. We find this symbol exactly the same in Hindu beliefs as the Naga, in Greek mythology as the Hydra, in Sumerian symbolism, and in Mexican ruins. Even the seven-branched menorah in Judaism and the importance of the number seven in Islamic culture are seen as reflections of this symbolism in the Abrahamic religions. In spiritualism, these seven principles of creation...
Yeah, wasn't the world actually created in 7 days or something in the
Seven
Bible?
is a number that comes up a lot.
Yeah.
...of creation are thought to correspond to the seven chakras in our bodies. You can find dozens of similar examples in Churchward's book, The Sacred Symbols of Mu. Similar to Churchward, researcher and author Augustus Le Plongeon also supported these claims in his books. But there's a problem. Why should we believe all this? Yes, the subject is filled with captivating mysteries, secrets, and ancient history, but are there really any solid, rational, and credible truths? First, let's consider the claims of James Churchward, who popularized this topic. Actually, it was Churchward's friend Augustus Le Plongeon who first introduced this concept. Le Plongeon directly derived the term Mu from an ancient Maya manuscript called the Troano Codex, translated by French historian Charles-Étienne Brasseur de Bourbourg in 1864.
That's a name.
However, despite the translation of the Codex being proven incorrect, both Le Plongeon and Churchward continue to use the name Mu. In fact, the passage describing the sinking of Mu in the video is a result of this mistranslation, yet the authors continue to present this information in their books because it suited their narrative. Let's get back to Churchward. He indeed spent years in India with the British Army and dedicated his life to research, but there is not a single piece of evidence for the Nakul tablets he mentioned. When skeptics repeatedly asked him to show the tablets or reveal the places and teachers where he studied, Churchward always responded that he had sworn an oath to keep this ancient knowledge between teacher and student, and thus couldn't publicly disclose it. This is an important point because no matter how grand the data may seem, if the first step is flawed, the entire foundation is shaky. No matter how much you embellish it, for example, Churchward claimed that the language and symbols of Mu influenced many ancient civilizations. He even provided very detailed descriptions of how the ancient symbols of Mu were used exactly the same in these civilizations. But here's the problem. The Nasa'al tablets, where these symbols first appeared, are nowhere to be found. Without the oldest known source, how can we trust its authenticity? However, because the 19th century was an age of discovery, people were eager to dive into these exotic ideas without much skepticism. They didn't even question them. Read their books. They're really detailed and well written. 90% of readers would immediately believe in Mu without question. They didn't just make everything up. They conducted serious research. But the final link in the story has no source. However, if you read it knowing this fact, it doesn't matter whether Mu existed or not. You'll still understand the significant connections between ancient civilizations. As I mentioned, the books are meticulously prepared and provide great information, but the story's foundation in Mu has serious source issues. Personally, while researching this video, I was able to see the traces of a civilization that left a global impact on the world. However, we still need more concrete evidence to determine whether Mu existed or Atlantis was real. Yes, there are belief similarities across the world that suggest an advanced being or beings taught the basic knowledge and established civilizations. And as we saw in the video, there's also a shared mystery in construction and engineering. But ultimately, I don't think we have enough information yet to fully connect these to Atlantis, Mu, or those mysterious root races. However, as geology advances, we're learning that old myths aren't always just myths. For example, the Bimini Road, an underwater man-made structure believed to be connected to Atlantis, was discovered off the coast of the Bahamas. And the list of discoveries keeps growing.
We will link this video in the description. You guys are free to go check it out, give them a thumbs up, support the original creators. They appreciate it, and so do we. I've actually watched a bunch of videos about lost civilizations and things, and like I said, I like to watch like Ancient Aliens and stuff like that just to see what they're talking about. So there's a lot of people out there who notice the similarities between, you know, ancient cultures in a time period where our current thought process tells us that those things shouldn't be possible. That kind of global travel shouldn't have been possible. The kind of spreading of information across those vast areas shouldn't have been possible based on what we currently know about things.
Yeah.
The way in which things were constructed or set up, the moving of giant blocks or the shaping of giant stones so precisely in some of those cases, indicates to ancient peoples being able to do stuff that we don't understand how they did it or where it came from.
Yeah, the only thing that I can think of is that in modern culture, we tend to think in terms of time taken to accomplish something within, say, a single lifetime. We have a tendency towards things should be done fast and efficiently, and that's because our technology allows us to do things fast and efficiently. But an ancient civilization that's been around for centuries, or even thousands of years, where you don't have the distractions or forms of entertainment of modern technology, like, people really didn't have much to do with their time. So it's like, oh, it might have been impossible to move these massive blocks of stone. And it's like, well, yeah, but if you're gonna have have people spend their entire lifetime working on moving that one block of stone, maybe it is possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly true that society was not always set up the way that it is today, and so there may have been like large portions of the population who were basically servants or slaves or, you know, forced to do manual labor on big public works. I mean, we know that was done in Egypt at the very least, you know, so anytime you place a large force of humans towards working at something for, you know, multiple generations of those people, I mean, you end up with something that's a totally...
Yeah, these are projects that could have taken multiple families and tribes, multiple generations of work. And again, what else are they going to do with their time?
And I think that's perpetuated by, I mean, a lot of the massive constructions that we do know about or do have history on, like, we know that, like, the pyramids were built by, or at least most of them were built by pharaohs as tombs. So presumably that pharaoh ordered the construction of it to be a tomb by the end of his life. So, you know, it kind of lends itself to the thought process of these things, at least being within a single lifetime. You know, they've, you know, uncovered the whole, the massive tomb of the first emperor of China with all the terracotta warriors. And that massive complex was, you know, ordered by a dude for his burial site and was completed within that guy's lifetime. So, but again, how many people were ordered to do that? Like,
yeah, like I think a lifetime can still be multiple decades, like say 50 years, and how much will several million people working over 50 years accomplish?
Right. And I mean, as far as moving the giant monolithic stones and stuff, like, I don't know that you could get enough manpower hands on it to lift them to that height versus the area that there is to actually lay hands on it. So there is some sort of technique or something happening that we don't understand what it was. And like, to the point of that guy at Coral Castle, like, he had an army of one. So he was doing something, you know what I mean?
So there is certainly that mysterious element of, it's still possible that there is some technique or ability that certain people might have had back then.
Right, that we don't have any record of. We don't know how that was accomplished. I don't think that necessarily means that there was some sort of Star People intervention. That's not...
It's a separate topic for a separate
Yeah, that's
video.
A totally separate thing. But I do think, and I understand why it lends itself to the idea that there was a previous advanced civilization of humans on the planet that was spreading their culture globally, when you see evidence of that type of a technique happening in multiple different areas of the world in a time when theoretically it shouldn't have been possible for them to spread that. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting thought process. It's an idea that correlation lends itself to exploring that idea. And certainly the more we find, we've discovered and found things underwater that point to civilizations that used to be above ground and no longer are,
Yeah.
right? So
the whole flood thing, cataclysm, something happened.
We just don't know exactly what that was or anything. I don't think you have sufficient evidence to draw solid conclusions, but I think it's interesting enough to continue looking into it.
Now, any thoughts on the briefly mentioned notion in this video that this originator civilization were like originally ethereal beings, or?
Well, I mean, to my understanding of things, we're all actually ethereal beings, and the human form evolved over time to a capacity to be able to experience this world and this reality in a way that allows us to use more of our capacity here than some other previous life forms. Like the physical form had to kind of evolve within the system in order to be able to house and express more of the capability that we have in an energy form.
So do you think it's possible that if you had this original civilization, that they were closer to that origin point, they were more in tune and hence more capable of influencing reality around them?
It's entirely possible. I mean, and again, like when you have to his point, like a shaky foundation link, like the whole idea of Mu came out of a mistranslation of ancient text and mysterious tablets that never materialized, secret knowledge that you were forbidden from sharing. Like it kind of reminds me of the other video we were doing about the kid who was like, the things I've discovered, you can't know them. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I can't
the guy
share
who dreamed that he had two different lives. Yeah, it could be, but
it's
who knows?
You have shaky actual evidence for anything like that, but that doesn't mean I don't think it's possible that there was previously a sufficiently advanced human or human-esque predecessor here. I think I've told you before that I do get the sense that this isn't the first time this was attempted. Advanced consciousness to be able to experience tangible reality.
Yeah.
Like I get, and again, like I don't know how that expresses itself. Like I don't know if there were attempts on other planets and other timelines and other realities. Like
the time frame for that could be much wider.
Right. That could be a much broader concept than just, our planet. Yeah. But I do actually get the sense in the hit that this isn't the first time that advanced consciousness has been attempted in a 3D circumstance.
Yeah.
And the other sense I get is, generally speaking, previous attempts of it have proved problematic in one way or another.
Yes, time will tell whether or not this one will also prove problematic.
If you're in an attraction-based system, as we are, which again, believe me or don't, it's okay. What you spend the most time putting your energy and your thought process into attracts that similar energy to you. So for advanced consciousness that can choose what they're thinking or think about more complex things, think into the future, basically, imagine. There's a lot of problems with 3D reality. There's fear. There's the possibility of bad things happening. There's a lot that, we use a lot of our imagination capacity to imagine all of the outcomes that we don't want, to live in a space of trying to defend ourselves from bad stuff, right? Like that's just part of being physically human on the planet. But at the same time, in an attraction-based system, that kind of a thought process almost always attracts not cool things. And I mean, if you think about that, I think that's just kind of, you can look at the history of humanity and see all of the not cool things that have been been attracted to us out of a sense of fear or the need to protect ourselves against something else. And, often that gets turned towards other people. There are stability issues with advanced consciousness operating in 3D reality, Whereas those energy bodies, those energy, when we're energy beings, we don't have the same threat system happening. There's no physical threat to you as a soul or an energy body, if you prefer. This existence is both highly valuable for the expansion that it provides, but it's also difficult to keep it stable. It's difficult to convince humans that you don't need to be so afraid of everyone and everything else.
Well, it's an instinctive response.
I would say it's a natural response to being able to have pain and sadness, and
I think bereft of any exterior knowledge, the instinct towards negative influence and impact, whether it be pain or whatever else, you're going to instinctively be like, oh, I do not want this, I want to avoid it, and develop that response. The notion of needing to respond to that in a more positive thinking sense of focusing on good thoughts, you need almost like a completely separate set of information to respond that way.
It's really about the balance. Obviously, some things are threats and you have to be able to defend yourself, but you can't let that fear overtake your mental algorithm. It needs to be more fun, more engaging, more something on your mind to think about the things you do want, to think about the positive outcomes, to think about we kind of make it a habit that imagining or thinking about joyful things or focusing on happiness and joy takes a backseat to the things that hurt us or scarred us or things we want to avoid in the future. It's why people have a fear of public speaking and a fear of ridicule and a fear of failure. And those are the thoughts that are pervasive in people's minds because they hope to avoid that, moving forward because it feels so painful and scary to them. But when you let those thoughts take over the mental algorithm, like your YouTube feed, if that's what you're engaging in, if that's what you're clicking on, then that's what the algorithm brings you more of. And it becomes a kind of a downward spiral of fear and anger and response mechanisms. It would be more beneficial to spend more of your time imagining things that actually make you happy or feel cool or whatever, you know what I mean, to keep your feed equally cat videos, or you know what I mean, to let that be as important as other things.
I just think that in order to do that, it's almost necessary to have an exterior force explain that to you. I don't think it's a conclusion you come to naturally through responses learned growing up. It's difficult, I think, at best, if you have no exterior teaching force to come to those conclusions through just normal means.
Well, if you think about it, like think back to this is kind of taking a weird turn, but think back to when you were a child, like before you were socialized in any way. Didn't you spend your time imagining dinosaurs and adventures, and weren't you able to walk up to people and just say, hi, I want to be friends? Like, children don't naturally do that. They learn to do that through interactions with other adults.
Well, interactions with the world as a whole, yes.
Mm-hmm. So I do think you're right that it would do us wonders as thinking creatures on the planet to help little ones coming in to know that they don't have to focus on all the horrible things. I think it would have been helpful for us to know that,
many children, I imagine, who would benefit from a better environment to teach that kind of more positive thinking philosophy.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, being human doesn't come with an instruction manual. Nobody came into the world knowing what to do with it, and everybody's viewpoint of how to operate in the world is a product of their own experiences, of their own environment and their own culture. So the best I can do is say things like that on the internet, put it out there and say, hey, imagine, at least spend as much time imagining the good stuff as you do the bad.
In a very rough attempt to segue back to the topic of the video itself, I don't know what these ancient civilizations generally thought of or worked towards in their thinking, whether positive or negative, but considering that if they did exist, they apparently ended in some sort of cataclysm.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe building giant stone temple stuff wasn't the way to go.
Well, I mean, and again, it's all based on legend, but the dude did say that at some point the priesthood seized power, and we definitely have a tendency towards hierarchical thought processes, right? Like the more power and wealth you have, the cooler you are, and people are beneath you is also a long-standing generational curse of humans.
That totally doesn't have any negative repercussions at all moving forward. But on that bright note, let's just hope our civilization doesn't fall beneath the waves.
Let's not be Atlantis, please. I don't know.
Positive thoughts, people. Positive thoughts.
Exactly. And I think that, hopefully in the future we can discover the remnants of those civilizations and maybe learn something about them, learn something from what happened to them,
It would be awesome, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's nice when we get new puzzle pieces and the picture expands. So I'm 100% for like researching things, even if they get ridiculed, because you never know what you find. And like I said, a lot of science was a crazy idea when it first started. So I support this idea.
All right, then.
All right, that's what I got. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Like, subscribe, all of that fun stuff. And we will see you guys next time on Unraveling the Unexplained.
Have a good evening.